Thank you very much to all for being present. It's a pleasure to be gathered here, and I would like to invite our president, Senator Cuevas from Mexico, who represents us in IPU. Thank you, Gabriel.
Welcome to all. I would like to express to you that we are very happy to have this opportunity to meet in the occasion of the high-level political forum. As Senator Romero and Paddy were explaining, this is a parliamentary forum, and formally this is the second time that it is happening. IPU was organizing this kind of meetings before, but this is now an official parliamentary forum on the occasion on the high-level political forum. So I am glad to see so many of you online. If it wasn't for the ongoing pandemic, we would all be attending the main session of the high-level political forum in New York, together with our ministers or ambassadors. The high-level political forum is the main United Nations hub to track progress toward the 17 SDGs that governments committed to implement by 2030. 5 years in, no country is on track to achieve all the goals. There are some regions or even some countries that are presenting very good advances, but certainly for other countries or regions, it's becoming very challenging. The vast majority are behind on many of the goals, and several may fail up to them. At this rate of progress, we will not have eradicated poverty by 2030, even by the very minimal official standard of $1.9 a day. By the more realistic standard of $5 a day, there will be at least 2.3 billion people living in poverty by 2030. This is from the July 2020 report of the Special UN Rapporteur on Poverty. And allow me to bring here the last report published by Oxfam about 2 months ago. Oxfam was saying that due to the pandemic, about 500 million people could be pushed back to poverty. So these numbers are clearly going to grow, and we need to do something. We need to work for the most vulnerable people. Aside from official reports, we know from a recent public opinion survey in 104 countries of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network that only a minority of respondents, about 16%, believe that the SDGs will be achieved for most of the part. This is all very worrying. The SDGs are the most consequential agenda of our time. Actually, when we think about the current situation, we need to do two very important things. The first one is to stop this pandemic, to work together, to find a common solution. And then we have in the SDGs a very important roadmap, a toolkit, how we should be working for a more inclusive planet. SDGs are a very comprehensive plan. And if we go to the parliamentarians' agenda, not all of our colleagues are so much aware, informed, or even working with SDGs. But if we take a look to them, or if we ask them also to get engaged, SDGs are the best roadmap for humanity. So what is at stake is the livelihood of billions of people and the sustainability of the planet as we know it. It is about building a more inclusive planet. It is about building a green one. It is about also understanding that this is a big chance to include women in all different spheres. Failing the SDGs will also cause unprecedented social unrest, mass migration, and probably more conflicts within and across borders. People will grow even more disenchanted with their governments and with politics in general. The COVID-19 pandemic has dealt a major blow to the SDGs. It has highlighted all that is wrong and dysfunctional in the world, like the growing divide between finance and the real economy, or the extreme vulnerability of the global supply chains. The pandemic has highlighted pre-existing inequalities of income and wealth, but also of access to public goods and fundamental human rights. With easy access to health, savings to rely on, more stable jobs, and greater capacity for remote working, the rich have fared much better than the poor. Likewise, the developing countries are struggling much more than the industrialized economies in the face of the health crisis and the global recession related to COVID-19. We need to understand the size, the importance of these challenges. Yes, we all are experiencing a lot of restrictions and limitations due to COVID-19 pandemic, but the problem is not going to end there. The problem is going to continue with economies that are failing to protect very important jobs. And when that happens, one is the numbers that we are seeing, for example, are the financial markets. But the other challenge are the very important jobs that are disappearing due to the pandemic, or in some cases, even due to automation. And that's going to bring us also other different challenges. We're still struggling with climate change. This year is becoming warmer and warmer. We are going to continue struggling, including women and the most vulnerable groups. We are going to continue with previous challenges, but now with bigger accents. So this is a moment where the parliamentary community has to do something, because the next step is that there's a very important temptation for some authoritarian governments that use people fears to restrict freedoms, to restrict human rights, and to gain power. Of course, leaving aside citizens and civil society. As today's program notes, there are at least three overarching lessons from this crisis. The first is that people are the lifeline of any economy. When workers stop working and consumers stop buying, the economy crashes. We need to rethink the economy to be more people-centered so that it serves real human needs. Let's be less fixated with GDP and much more concerned with human well-being. For some people, especially technocrats, and I went to a very technocratic university some years ago, and the problem with the way we started measuring our economy a long time ago is thinking that GDP is going to reflect how our country is growing. But GDP measures the economic growth, but that's clearly not translated into well-being, because we need to measure inequalities. We need to measure inclusion, how women, how adolescents, how children are included. Where are those people that are making our economies work during this pandemic, the famous essential workers? Second, the virus reminds us how the whole of the economy depends on nature. The more we undermine nature, the more we undermine the economy itself. COVID-19 is not an isolated incident, but part of a long pattern of infectious diseases related to our unsustainable exploitation of nature. And I think that it shows that we can or cannot learn about the consequences of this pandemic. If you remember, a couple of months ago, that perhaps seems very far, but just a couple of months ago, what we were reading in the news or in social media was how amazing we were able to see the mountains and the skies and how the animals were coming to the cities. And that's not part of the news anymore. Once the lockdowns are ending in each country, in each region, nature is being threatened again by the humans. A third lesson from the pandemic is about the role of government in managing the economy. As the pandemic began to wreck national economies everywhere, it is to government that people and companies look to for help. And governments did come to the rescue of one way or another. Well, most of the countries, some others didn't, but in general, most of the countries respond with a plan. In many cases, decades of austerity policies in which governments told their people that there is no money for health, education, infrastructure, and environmental protections, all the stuff that comes with the SDGs, were reversed almost overnight. Now the debate in parliaments is about universal income. It's about universal health coverage. It's about education and how to try to diversify it and become more inclusive. For all these reasons, we can possibly think of achieving the SDGs just by tweaking the system that we have. We need to shift the system in a whole new direction and reset it on a much stronger footing. 10 years ahead, until 2030, give us just enough time to do that before it is too late. As parliamentarians, we have a key role to play in resetting the system across the board. We are more than legislators. We are also opinion makers and community leaders. Our first responsibility is that of accountability through oversight, making sure that governments have an effective SDGs plan in place that is properly costed through the budget process. And that's also part of the Parliament's responsibilities. Unfortunately, this oversight remains weak. A UNSDNS survey of 30 countries shows that while most of them have adopted a national plan and established some kind of SDG coordination mechanism to implement it, only half of these same countries have reflected the SDGs in the national budget, and often in insufficient ways. In Mexico, when we are allocating budget, we used to say, I used to be some years ago part of the budget committee, and I was in charge of the big negotiation. And we used to say that true love is only shown in budget. So we can speak about a lot of priorities, and we can go back to our constituencies and say how much we care about certain problems. But if we are not allocating budget, that is not love. That is not a priority. That is only political narrative, and that is precisely what kills public trust. Our own survey in IPU of parliamentary engagement in this year's voluntary national reviews shows that less than half, 18 out of 42 of the governments presenting this progress reports bothered to inform Parliament of the process. 55% of parliaments provided some kind of input into the government report, but the quality varies dramatically. Another key step we need to make as parliamentarians is quite simple: putting out our house in order. Our strength comes from the fact that we represent the people. This, however, remains an ideal more than a fact. Women occupy only 25% of all seats and all seats in parliament, and young people only 28%. And young is kind of youngish. I feel young, but not in this category. For IPU, young means under 45 years old. So this is what is reflected in this percentage of 28%. But if we go, for example, on understanding that more than half of the total world's population is under 30 years old, well, if we translate that age group to the parliamentary seats, it goes only to 2.2%. So our parliaments are not being inclusive, not for women, not for youth. And that means that we are not fully representing people. And that's not fully democratic. So despite that, the fact that both groups are key to the implementations of SDGs going forward, again, women and youth are clearly underrepresented. While there are no official statistics on the representation of the poor themselves within our ranks, it is quite clear that they too are severely underrepresented. To come to politics, we need to be sure that our families are going to be safe, that they are going to have something to eat, a home to stay. So for poor people, going to politics is a privilege that they cannot afford. And we need to make it possible. We need to understand that a parliament is the reflect of a country's identity, of a country's plurality. Putting our own house in order also requires that we reform politics and the political process in a very deep way. The SDGs cannot be a constant battlefield of ideas and ideologies, a zero-sum game where my win is your loss. The SDGs require consensus building, and this in turn requires a less polarized or politicized political environment. We need to make our parliaments and our politics more transparent, more accessible to all, so that decisions are made with the greater good of society in mind. Again, putting people at the center of our decisions and not under the pressure of particular interests. Let's all commit to these reforms, which are part and parcel of SDG 16, the so-called governance goal. We have a lot to do right now in this very challenging moment for humanity. As parliamentarians, we legislate, we allocate budget, we oversee the government, and we represent the people. This is the moment where we can write a new page in humanity's history, a more sustainable, a more inclusive, a more feminist recovery. I am sure that if the 46,000 parliamentarians all over the world are committed with this recovery, we can change the planet. We can build a better world. So I'm sure that these conversations, that this Parliamentary Forum is going to give us a lot of very good ideas, an exchange of best practices at the national level that we can share, and of course, that we can implement in our countries, in our towns. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you very much for continuing closer to the IPU. Again, I miss you, we miss you, and I hope that this is going to be a very fruitful, well, morning for me, for someone is going to be afternoon, evening. For all, thank you. Thank you very much for participating with the IPU.
Thank you very much, Gabriela, for this presentation, very clear. I am the moderator today, as was said. I'm a senator in Argentina. My name is Senator Romero, and I chair the IPU committee. This Parliamentary Forum is a special event of the UN High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. We have today 200 members of Parliament and their staff taking part in this meeting, despite the time zone differences that are affecting many of us. This year's Parliamentary Forum tracks the main theme of the High-Level Political Forum, which focuses on accelerating the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in the remaining 10 years. It will also consider how the current COVID-19 pandemic is making the SDGs a lot harder to achieve. The virtual format for this year's forum gives us just 90 minutes, which means time management is very important, and we will be controlling your time. So the panelists will have 5 minutes each, and those of you wanting to ask a question or make a comment will have 2 minutes each. I'm going to invite the first panel member to discuss the questions raised in the program. First, I will invite Mr. Lorenzo Fierramonti of the Chamber of Deputies of Italy, who also teaches political economy at the University of Pretoria. Mr. Fierramonti was asked how we can refocus our economies to be less concerned with growth and GDP and more focused on human well-being, which is one of the main questions for this session. So therefore, Mr. Fioramonti of Italy, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. Thank you, Gabriela, for having invited me to this debate.
Thank you, everyone, for having me as part of this conversation, which I think is extremely, extremely important. And I'm very glad that the IPU is focusing on this topic at this time. I've got only 5 minutes, so I'm gonna make a very, very quick presentation. I've been studying for the past 10 years all the deficiencies and the weaknesses of our model of economic growth, which is the main problem we're facing these days. Okay, so climate change, the destruction of the environment, the growth of inequalities. You may even say the weakening of public health, which is the main reason why we're suffering from a global pandemic these days, right? All these phenomena have got one common element, and that is that our economic system is out of balance with human needs. As simple as that. So for over about 100 years, we've been building an economic system that was basically premised on one single creed, one single concept, and that is that all we need to be successful is to increase production and consumption. Not even looking at what kind of consumption, and certainly not bothering about what kind of production and what kind of consumption. So this is really, really myopic and short-sighted. Well, no, after the Second World War, it was kind of acceptable that having destroyed almost everything we had, it was acceptable that rebuilding was going to be leading towards better well-being for everyone. But since the 70s, we've seen exactly the opposite. We've seen that a system of production and consumption that had no respect for social dynamics, no care for natural ecosystems, was generating negative effects that were way more significant and profound than the financial gains that it created itself. So, and now we're at the very end of this process. And unless we change rapidly and drastically, we may not be able to deal successfully with the great goal of achieving sustainable development. At the end of the day, what we need is a new economic model, a new economic system that moves away from increasing production and consumption towards optimization of well-being. What does that mean in practice? It means that we need to have economies that improve our level of health, human health, and the health of the planet, people and planet. And I think Gabriela said this very clearly at the beginning when she said we need an economy that is people-centered. And what affects people's well-being is the quality of social connections and their personal health, as well as the quality of the environment in which they live. So rather than having an economy that in order to create financial gains, often for a very limited number of people, because inequalities have grown exponentially over the past few years, we need an economy that does exactly the opposite, that creates financial profit, but with financial profit, it also creates positive externalities. That is, a positive impact on human health, a positive impact on social relations, and thus decreasing inequalities, and a positive impact on the environment. You may say that COVID is a great opportunity because it has revealed how weak the current economic system is, how terrible the impacts, the negative impacts that we have disregarded for so long may be on even the economy itself. Without social health, without public health, there is no market. Without the environment, there are no natural resources, there's no production and consumption. So unless we start integrating different ways of measuring economic growth, in which you cannot reward a country for destroying the environment and increasing inequalities as a successful economy. And I think what is happening in the United States right now is very indicative of the flaws of economic growth. We have been celebrating the American economy as a superpower, as a successful economy for so long. And look at what is happening. Increasing inequalities and COVID have hit America so hard, harder than any other so-called high-income country. And that means that the American economy wasn't developed, was actually extremely weak, was actually extremely out of balance and not resilient at all. So what we should do is to try and help America develop in a different way. Because if we all follow the same pattern, if we all increase consumption and production, disregarding the negative effects that this has on society and the environment, we're going to be facing the same problems, and we're going to probably be as weak as the American economy is. And of course, the same can be said about other economies. I'm not going to get into this level of detail, but certainly it is striking that the superpower of the world, the most developed GDP economy in the world, it's also the one that is most severely affected by the pandemic. While we have countries that have promoted public health, have promoted the respect of the environment, that are now benefiting also economically from that. So the well-being economy is an economy that premises itself on human and planetary well-being, not economic growth, and expects all the systems to change accordingly.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. And now I will invite Dr. Kate Roll to take the floor. She teaches at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose of the University College of London. She was asked to focus her remarks on the question of how finance can be regulated to serve the needs of the real economy. In other words, how we can curb speculation and make sure that finances and money is put to a more productive use. You have the floor.
Great. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be invited by the IPU, and I want to express my appreciation to the other panelists and to the participants who bring such a wealth of experience from around the world. I also want to say I stand on the shoulders of giants, and my presentation is informed by the work of my colleagues, Professor Mariana Mazzucato and Dr. Josh Ryan Collins. This has been an extremely busy and exciting moment for my institute. These are moments of intense rupture and questioning and change. You know, just like the previous speaker said, we're seeing economies in a completely new light. It's a moment of innovation and of creative destruction. And at IIPP, what we're trying to do is reimagine the role of the state. So how can the state be bold, entrepreneurial, innovative? How can it provide leadership that prioritizes public value and a fair and sustainable future? And we talk about not just leveling the playing field, but also tilting the playing field in a certain direction towards a certain type of future, and building policies and industrial strategies around missions that are rooted in grand challenges like the SDGs. And I won't go over this in too great detail because the previous speakers have said it well, but the COVID-19 crisis has both shown us great weaknesses in our current system and also shown us our capabilities to do things differently. So we're seeing weak state institutions. We're seeing failings in economic systems, particularly around financialization, shareholder value supremacy, weak regulation. And the result of all of this is issues that are extractive practices, which include precarious work, including amongst our essential workers, high levels of private debt, profit-driven health innovation, and short-termism. Short-termism is a particularly important question in relation to the SDGs, where sustainability is literally talking about what the next generation will have. How do we preserve what we have for those who come after us? And we are seeing these positive sides, interest in mutual aid, interest in families and the elderly, the value of green space, exercise, health. And the majority of people being polled now do not want the world to go back to the way it was. And we're seeing, even amongst those who are most affected, a thirst for change. And in politics, we'd call this an Overton window, a moment of possibility for making bold changes. And we're really seeing that in terms of how countries have responded to the COVID crisis. So I was asked to speak specifically on finance systems and SDGs, and I'll speak both on green responses and COVID responses. In terms of greening finance, there's an increasing recognition from the Bank of England, across the world, that climate change poses systemic financial risks. and that these risks are material. And the other piece of this is that we need a technological shift to a low carbon economy. So we need big technological changes that reorganize the way we work, the way we live, the way energy is generated in order to address these risks. And these transformations are difficult and need to be managed to deal with issues like job loss, stranded assets, and the rise of uninsurable risk. So places that are so climate change affected, for example, with so much flooding that they become uninsurable. These are all risks. And the problem that we're seeing is that not dealing with this transition, taking a short-term view or ignoring climate change risk plants the seeds of further destruction. And this really reminds me, if you permit me, there was a wonderful study done on civil war a few years ago, and it looked at communities that did not participate in civil wars, which are widely understood to be terrible for everyone involved. And the study found that these communities that opted out of war didn't do that because they were wealthier, or didn't do that because they were better informed, or they had more charismatic leaders. They did that because they were able to look and see the future coming and take action, as opposed to others where they've stuck their head in the sand. And I think we're at a similar place where not managing these transitions, not thinking about them, really will create much more risk, much more challenges within the financial system. And so there are sets of practical policy approaches to deal with this transition, to deal with from the finance side, both through financial regulation and central bank actions. Some of these are already in action, particularly outside the US and Europe. Some of this is an increased push for disclosure of climate change financial risk. Some of this is central bank green lending quotas, greening finance, green quantitative easing, stress testing, greater capital requirements for firms that carry higher climate change risk. So there's lots of issues, lots of steps you can take along the way. And we're seeing similar steps with conditionalities around safe working, green recovery, with the COVID responses. So I think I'm running out of time, but I'll just say, we need to be thinking about the deal part of the Green New Deal, how we use the power, how we use the conditionalities in setting the terms of bailouts in COVID and setting terms of green bonds and green financing. States need to be bold in setting this direction. And for me, this isn't a problem of tools. There's lots out there that can be done. It's about waking up and seizing the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roll. We will now invite Ms. Wafa Bani Mustafa, member of the House of Representatives of Jordan, who serves as Vice President of the IPU Sustainable Development Committee. Ms. Mustafa will discuss the first question of the program about scaling up resources for universal health coverage, social protections, and environmental preservation.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to represent the Standing Committee of Sustainable Development. Actually, the pandemic drew our attention to leaving no one behind, but also leaving no country behind. And the pandemic provide that sustainable development will not be achieved unless there is a human solidarity and global cooperation. The SDGs formed a roadmap for the world for the next 10 years, but the pandemic comes suddenly, and that affect implementing and financing the SDGs. So there is a big need now to evaluate the advancement achieved in terms of the SDGs inside each country, according to the limited national resource now and limited international financing. The countries should rearrange its priorities depending on most needed goals their country needs, like healthcare, social protection, education, and environment. In my opinion, and I will show a screen now, the process for scaling up UHC, social protection, and the environment can go through 3 stages. The first stage, early preparation, should involve the preparing protective emergency plans, and also responsive legislative plans, also focusing on the importance of the data. The second stage will be the adaptation, and this stage should involve redesigning national budgets, and this is very important, and not all the countries and the government give the parliament the role during the pandemic to redesigning the national budget according to the new needs. Also, redefining the priorities according also to the pandemic, changing the ways of consumptions and spending. And by these 2 stages, the countries can reach the recovery stage. I will show you some facts from the 3 sectors. And I will try to not be very, and try to be very short. And just I want to attention you that at least the half of the world's population still do not have the full coverage in insurance health service. Also in the second sector of the social protection, only 25 of the global population are covered by comprehensive social security system that include the full range of benefits. From the environment sector, many facts, but I think everyone should go back for the Paris Agreement, and I think this is a very important agreement, and how to also keep the funding for this agreement coming and not stop. But as a member of Jordanian Parliament, and I have a lot of webinars with my colleague during the pandemic, during the curfew by internet application, I can say the role of parliamentarians should focus on many things, but I will show for you, because the short time, this four points. Many countries after COVID-19 adopt defense or emergency laws. Parliamentarians should maintain their overseeing the role to ensure that the government should not trespass the rights and public freedoms for people. Also, parliamentarians should be ready for people legislative needs, like increasing penal on domestic violence crime that increase during the curfew. or changing the labor law, which become a big problem in many countries, or the social security laws. Also, the parliamentarians should try to push the government to redesign budgets according to the new needs after the pandemic. And I think in my country, we didn't have this chance, but a lot of countries have this chance in their parliament. Also, the parliamentarians should always keep in touch with their local communities and try to be the link between the government and the local communities. And in my opinion, this is the real meaning of the localizing the SDGs. I didn't want to talk a lot, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
And therefore, we will invite Ms. Nirasaji Mumbodzwanda, Chair of the Board of Action Aid International, who works to combat poverty through development cooperation. She will also focus on the question of resource mobilization for development, but from the perspective of a leading civil society organization. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, moderator, and thank you to IPU for inviting me. Greetings from the Action Aid and from myself here in Zimbabwe. Underlying the COVID-19 crisis is a crisis of democratic accountability. Effective government has never been needed more, yet key public institutions have been revealed as drastically underfunded, unaccountable, and unresponsive. When governments put profits before people, all of us ultimately pay the price. We have allowed deep inequalities of race, wealth, age, gender, and political participation to grow. And now our failing public institutions ain't strong enough to overcome them. We need nothing less than a new social contract. Parliaments are the one place where open, transparent deliberations remain possible and where policymakers can be held to account. Legislators must lead the way in hearing the voices of women and of young people in considering alternatives and finding new solutions. 3 areas are particularly urgent. First, rebuilding public services. Frontline services such as water, sanitation, education, health have been decimated by underfunding during years of austerity. The COVID crisis has revealed exactly how important these services are, but the IMF continues to urge fiscal consolidation, and even during this emergency, many foreign creditors continue to demand that governments pay them first before allocating more to health and other essential services. Parliamentarians should urge temporary suspension or even cancellation of debt servicing and removal of harmful conditions attached to IFI loans. Parliamentarians should also call for longer-term debt renegotiation so that countries is not spending more on paying old debts than on achieving SDGs. As part of the new social contracts, government must commit to new standards of transparency and parliamentary oversight to ensure accountability for borrowing and for spending. Second, making tax fair. Even as public services have been neglected, we've allowed economic and political power of large corporations and wealthy elites to skyrocket. Fortunately, parliaments can tip the balance, reining in the power of big money and creating a fairer, more inclusive society through progressive taxation. Integral to COVID response should be a commitment to expand domestic tax revenue, including by ending harmful tax incentives and closing the tax loopholes that have unfairly advantaged global companies and wealthy elite. A recent group of global billionaires signed an open letter asking governments to raise taxes on the rich immediately and permanently. Of course, we must ensure that all tax revenues are spent in a transparent, accountable, and equitable way. The time for progressive taxation, for progressive tax and progressive spending is now. Third, achieving climate justice. Climate change is already here, and within the next 10 years, it will overshadow COVID-19. By 2030, loss and damage due to climate change will cost developing countries $700 billion every year, and over 200 million people may be displaced. Yet negotiations are deadlocked, and despite everything, public subsidies keep flowing into the fossil fuel industry and into unsustainable agribusiness. This must end now. Through ambitious implementation of the Paris Agreement, parliamentarians have the opportunity to develop policies that will transform lives, designing responses that are centered on human rights, on equity, and on justice. Coronavirus relief and rebuilding measures provide a historic opportunity to start shifting public money out of fossil fuels and into green alternatives that can create sustainable jobs for the future. In conclusion, parliamentarians have a unique mandate, and in this moment, to lead an inclusive national dialogue on how governments should raise and spend to promote a just, healthy, and rebuild the future. At national level, we urge you to explore innovative examples, such as that set by France, where citizens' assemblies have been convened to develop proposals for legislators to consider and vote on. A real reset will demand far-reaching measures on public services, on debt, on tax, and on climate transition. This need input and support from women, from young people, and from voices that have been marginalized for too long. Done well, such assemblies will strengthen the mandate of legislators. At the international level, we urge you to support calls for the United Nations to convene an urgent reconstruction summit to accelerate action on global issues impeding COVID-19 recovery, such as debt cancellation, global tax rules, and climate finance. Thank you very much.
We will now invite Dr. Mukisa Kituyi, Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. His agency generates some of the best analysis there is on the relationship between trade, investment, and development. He will address the last question on the program about the structural imbalances in the global economy.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. First, to express our concern from our research that the global 20% decline in trade and 40% decline in FDI flows represents a major challenge for many developing countries to attain the aspirations of Agenda 2030. Prior to the COVID, progress on SDG investment from all sources, domestic and international, public and private, was only clear in 6 out of the 10 SDG sectors. This includes infrastructure, climate change mitigation, food and agriculture, health, telecommunications, and biodiversity. However, overall growth has been falling short of requirements, and investment in important areas like education, water, sanitation was way below targets. Now, the global effort to fight the pandemic is boosting the growth of sustainability funds, particularly social bonds. We hope that over the next 10 years, this will be a new lever that can help grow areas that are being left behind in SDG-related investments, particularly for LDCs. Indeed, today, most sustainability-themed funds are invested in developing countries, particularly in renewable energy. The continuing fear of another wave of pandemic risks prompting even calls for more nationalist approaches to trade and investment. Now, this raises concerns over the prospects for multilateral cooperation and a profound shift in globalization in favor of greater self-sufficiency and rising economic nationalism. Globalization is poised to go more local and regional. Post the pandemic, new normal is likely to be entailing a sustained period of diminished international flows in goods and investment, and even less human traffic around the world, physical human mobility will significantly decline. For one, international travel will take a long time to recover, if at all. On the other hand, labor mobility will also be substantially curtailed. This could challenge many small economies dependent on tourism and remittances. A significant change is expected with the international fragmentation of production. Now, this is speeding up the restructuring of global value chains, creating resilience through reshoring, relocalization, and more attention to regional rather than international production networks. As legislators, members of parliament have a vital role to play in reacting to these changes and helping channel national mindsets towards SDG in the post-COVID new normal. Opportunities will, of course, arise from the acceleration of digital transformation and new forms of the service economy, particularly digitally enabled, but will require dealing with digital and economic inequalities that are a pre-existing condition before the pandemic. Trade in services will be an important part of the recovery and resilience post-COVID. At national level, one of the biggest areas of opportunity is enhanced South-South cooperation, growing of larger regional entities like the negotiations of the Continental Free Trade Area in Africa that is underway with certain priority areas. Regulatory cooperation in health measures is also very important, particularly in non-tariff measures, sanitary and phytosanitary conditions. The transparency in NTMs is particularly going to be important and relatively important for empowering women and vulnerable groups. Voluntary sustainability standards can also contribute to align the new normal with more sustainable conduct and transparent audit services. Thank you very much for your attention.
This is Raza Kavakçı from Turkey. Today is the 4th anniversary of the coup attempt in Turkey. So we have a big day at the Grand National Assembly of Turkey. We had lost 251 lives. So I would like to give my remember them before I start. I think I am grateful to the IPU and Senator Romero for this very thought-provoking panel. We received a lot of information. Thank you very much. As Gabriela stated, COVID fighting process, for this process, we need global common solutions, and we can utilize the SDGs as a roadmap. People should be able to afford healthcare. They shouldn't worry about how they can pay for this as we deal with the pandemic. So this process made us realize, I think, how interconnected we are and how interdependent we are. And it's been a humbling experience. So we realized all the inequalities, yet we're all the same. So we have to deal with it no matter how rich we are, how developed we are faced with this pandemic. And until we can make sure that everybody is safe and the disease is over, we won't be able to move. So I think we can take this humbling experience as humankind to move forward and realize that when we're talking about the environment, even if it may not be in our national interest to move forward and have a green process in our nations and in our finance, we need to realize that we are all on this boat together globally, and that if we cannot resolve all our issues like, violence, like poverty, like environmental issues, then we will all fail together. It will be the end of the world. So I think this is a good step. If we as parliamentarians at the IPU, we represent basically the most of the world population. So if we can move forward all together, I think we can overcome anything. I wanted to thank you for this opportunity. Thanks to all the presenters. I got a lot of very good information, and I'll be sharing my notes and studying them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. We will now give the floor to David, if he's there. And Dr. Ali Al-Waimi is the next one.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Romero, and thank you very much, colleagues, for being here. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate. This is a wonderful meeting, and I think what we're really here today to talk about at this high-level forum is resetting and fast-tracking the Sustainable Development Goals in a practical way. I think what we're all struggling with as legislators is the practical implementation of a wonderful roadmap, a powerful set of values, but it's always difficult to translate that kind of approach into real change that our citizenry can understand and can buy into. One of our speakers said earlier that the economic system is out of balance with human needs. I think that's true, but I see it a little differently. I think our economic system is out of balance with the planet's carrying capacity. As our last speaker just indicated, COVID is demonstrating the extent to which we are interconnected. But it's also demonstrating that the responses to COVID and the responses to the SDGs have to be informed by science and by evidence. And secondly, as our president said in her opening remarks, they have to focus on people's well-being, and they need to know that the measures that we're proposing will in fact improve their well-being. So whether we get into discussing universal health care, social protections, environmental integrity, green economy, income or wealth redistribution, financial regulations, trade and investment regimes, these are all issues addressed by the SDGs. Whatever we do, however we do it, they have to be evidence-based and focus on people and communities. We know the capacity to develop and implement solutions is uneven across countries, and so we have to keep providing assistance and building capacity. That's critical. Dr. Roll's insight on finance is heartening, what we've dubbed here in Canada ecological fiscal reform. But here's a plea for all parliamentarians. It's sometimes easier to be at the top of the ship in the mast, calling for the ship of state to take a new direction, calling for change. It's much harder for parliamentarians to come down off the mast and get into the engine room and help redesign the measures that will take us into a new direction, a new trajectory, where there's an appropriate balance between carrying capacity of the planet and our activities. So my plea is to ask parliamentarians worldwide to roll up their sleeves and get into the designing of these measures. What fiscal measures? What changes? What do they look like? Finally, bring our peoples along. They're perfectly capable of understanding these SDGs. They're perfectly capable of understanding these challenges, but we often forget that they're busy leading just-in-time lives, trying to make a living, pay rent, raise their families, and at this time, deal with a terrible crisis. I'm very hopeful about the future and the implementation of the SDGs. We've got to do this. We've got to do it by 2030. Thank you very much for letting me speak.
Okay, my name is Ali Al-Nuaimi. I am from the United Arab Emirates. First of all, I'd like to thank all the panelists for their great and valuable contribution. In the last 3 decades, we've been talking always about sustainable development. And I think the recent challenge that we are facing, the world facing, COVID-19, show us an opportunity that we need to come together. We need to work together. And, you know, when it comes to the IPU, we have several committees related to certain issue about sustainability, like the challenges the world is facing, like the climate change, like poverty, issues related to gender, issues related to countering terrorism and extremism. And here, if I may propose that we need a task force from different committees that can develop a strategy where the IPU can help the world, the government, NGO, all stakeholders to face the challenge that that common challenge that we face, all of us, the world is facing. And this is where, when you look at COVID-19, actually, although the World Health Organization tried to play a role, but issues related to the political differences also were obstacles. And here we missed the IPU engagement and role, actually, to help and helping in providing solutions and exchange expertise, and also awareness to different countries, especially the African countries, Latin America, Southeast Asia, so the less developed countries. So if I may propose that we need to form a task force from different committees related to issue which we need to develop a sustainable strategy where they can work together to put it together, and we make sure that they are activated when it comes to the common challenges that we face. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I believe we have the Philippines, or maybe first Afghanistan.
Okay, good.
Adelante.
With the permission of the Excellency President, Ms. Gabriela, greeting to all honorable hosts, IPU members, and Member of Parliament. I'm Senator Kalimzai, Head of International Affairs Commission, Senator Akbar Stanakzai, the Deputy Speaker of the Senate, Senator Gulale Akbari, the Head of Women Committee in Senate, and Senator Nader Baloch, the Head of the Public Health Committee of Senate, are here with me. They are sending their greeting from Kabul. As everyone, all nations are suffering from COVID-19. Unfortunately, Afghanistan is suffering from double COVID. Number one is a COVID-19, which is the same as everywhere in the other globe. And number two is the ongoing war, which since 40 years is ongoing in Afghanistan and is taking more life every day than COVID-19. Regarding covering from COVID-19, all global countries should work hand by hand and fight against this pandemic until it's zero all over the world. Otherwise, if COVID-19 exists in any part of the world or in any country, the rest of the world will be suffering. They will be having lots of difficulties in their transit, business, transportation, and all, even the regular passengers. So for that, we propose that the stronger countries, the bigger countries, those countries, they have a better economy, take a greater part and work with a backwarded country hand by hand to fight against this COVID. And the number two is the war issue in Afghanistan. For sure that sustainable development is always related to peace and security. If there is no security in some nations, there will be no sustainable development. For that, the good news is that now the international community, especially NATO, led by United States, have started the negotiation with the Taliban in Qatar. And one agreement was already signed 2 months ago. Following and continuing that agreement, anti-Afghan dialogue is going to start closely, either in Qatar or in Europe. We as Afghan would like to request our international partners, those countries that have a good friendly relation with us, to put any pressure on the Taliban side to accept the two last decade achievement of Afghanistan, which Afghanistan got it due to the support of your respected nations and the international community. And also the right of women is a very important issue. I mean, today is a modern global. If the Taliban has any suggestions in the constitution changing, in the peace dialogues, they should be respecting the women's rights, the education, the human rights, the last 19 years achievement of Afghanistan, and that's how we're gonna say end to the war in Afghanistan and put Afghanistan in a situation where can follow the line to the sustainable development. Thank you very much, respected MPs. Thanks to the speaker and all the host committees, and that's all my words.
Thank you very much, dear colleague from Afghanistan. Pia Cayetano from the Philippines, you now have the floor.
Greetings to all. Hello, greetings to all of you. I am Pia Cayetano, a senator from the Philippines. And what I'd like to share is my experience, because in the Philippines, we have a newly created committee in both the Senate and the House of Representatives. So I chair the committee on Sustainable Development Goals, Innovation, and Futures Thinking. So in this time of this pandemic, it gave us, or me, that opportunity to really focus on the SDGs. Because naturally, the tendency of chairmen of different committees to focus on their specific topic, but the SDGs are very interrelated, and it's very rare that you will see overlapping. It is common that there are overlapping concerns, but it is rare that these are discussed. So the SDG committee allows us to focus on each goal, but also to see the overlapping concerns. So I have been having hearings on every single SDG, and because my committee is actually SDG Innovation and Futures Thinking, it's also looking at the futures of these various goals. So whether it's food, it's education, or health, that is what my committee handles. And we passed a law exactly during the time of COVID to empower the president to act. And we ensured that there were provisions that they act in a sustainable manner, that we focus on sustainability. So my very quick recommendations would be the following. Number one, we redefine how we measure growth, because if it is not measured in a sustainable way, then we do not help promote sustainability. Number two, we review the budget from a sustainable lens. Three, government leads by example by investing in green infrastructure, in green cities, addressing the needs of the most vulnerable, like women and children, and so on and so forth. Fourth is we incentivize sustainable activities and business. And fifth, promote regional cooperation among parliamentarians, global cooperations, and partnerships with international and local non-government organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thailand, you have the floor. Professor Krontisilum, you have the floor.
Dear Madam President, Senator Romero, greeting from Thailand. Devastating effect of COVID pandemic has warned us that the world is very small, and also will be vulnerable to any emerging disease in the future. So we have to work closer and closer together. Thailand has 3 points. Number one, Thailand agree with several speakers that the focus of development should be on human, environment, and planet health based on SDG. Number two, all countries, including Parliament, have to work collectively together at national and international level for realization and achieving SDG. Number three, IPU and Parliament in each country should strongly engage and commit support for achieving SDG through its function, like issue friendly law to SDG, allocation of budget, and also monitoring and oversight for the implementation of SDG, like annual report from the government. Thailand also would like to share example with member country. For example, we have universal healthcare coverage. We also apply our late King philosophy on development, sufficiency economy philosophy for development that will go parallel with SDG goal, because this is based on moderation, based on reasonableness, and also based on immunity, another low risk in development. Those are our goal. Similar to SDG, fundamental issue of this sufficiency economy philosophy is ethics and morality, and also knowledge and wisdom that will lead us for achieving SDG. With that, thank you very much for your attention and giving us opportunity to show you. And would like to share and learn from member country if we have opportunity. Thank you.
Senator Bohm of Canada, you have the floor.
My name is Peter Beam, Senator from Canada. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak today at the IPU. I want to thank the panelists for thought-provoking presentations, as well as colleagues for their insights. I wanted to go back to something that Gabriela Cuevas said at the very beginning, and this is with respect to how to measure the recovery. There's a lot of speculation whether it will be a V, it will be a U, it will be a W. Most of those prognoses fall into the GDP category. And with the impact of this pandemic, what we really have to look at are a number of other indicators. So GDP is not sufficient enough by any means. We should also look more, I think, at the cross-sectional impact on the SDGs. So if you take SDG 4 and SDG 5, gender and education, and you see the prolonged impact of this pandemic, many children all over the world, in developing countries and developed countries, may be losing a year of school. And with that loss of a year of school, there's a great impact on their caregivers, who inevitably tend to be women, their mothers. So this has an important impact on the economy as well. So as we move forward, we need to look at the sort of intersectional aspects to the SDGs and their impact post-pandemic. The last point I'd like to make is that for donor countries, developing countries alike, and those who have graduated from ODA status and might unfortunately find themselves moving backwards and having to receive official development assistance again, it's very, very important to look at innovative and new means of development finance. Now, Dr. Roll mentioned that a bit in her remarks. There's a lot of work going on in that in the OECD. This is something I think that we parliamentarians should pick up and press our governments to look at in a bit more of a, shall we say, enlightened way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Cesar Ruela from Spain, you have the floor. Yes, go ahead. Yes, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to take part in this forum. The discussion was very interesting. 3 ideas to contribute to everything that has been said during the forum, which was very interesting. I'm a representative of Spain, but I'm in Brussels at the European Parliament. And the current situation of COVID-19, in addition to showing the relationship between humanity with ecosystems, we are Homo sapiens, and we are the dominant species, but devastating for the planet. And as Westerners, in a parliamentary forum, I want to say this clearly. I believe that there have been opinions on the fact that a pandemic could not affect, as it has affected from a health and economic point of view, Europe. The second idea is that the economic reconstruction that we are implementing in Europe has 2 bases, and it is that it needs to follow an ecological transition, and it needs to be fair. And I believe that a congressman from Canada or someone else was talking about taxation, and this is an issue that we need to delve into. And here in Europe, we are defending this, particularly the leftist groups, we are trying to rebuild our tax system, and the European Parliament has a lot to promote because there are governments of Europe, but also the European Commission have rested on their laurels, and they haven't done what should have been done, and that's why we're here. And we shouldn't forget, dear members of Parliament from the whole world, members of our forum, that there is a risk of nationalism, that we haven't overcome this. And despite the devastating impact of COVID-19 and the consequences of the economic crisis, there still are those that fear this close relationship between humanity and ecosystems, and the fact that Homo sapiens sapiens is the dominant species, but we also are a weak and dependent species. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the floor. In my view, a nation can only prosper when its people have a suitable standard of living and opportunities to become a positive contributor to the economy. Aiming to achieve this, Pakistan adopted SDGs as Pakistan's development goals. We are using these goals as a roadmap to ensure a better life for all through solving problems relating to healthcare, nutrition, education, poverty, gender inequality, climate change, and more. But unprecedented crisis of COVID-19 has reshaped lives of everyone around the world. It is a health issue, but it has shut down economy globally. Social vulnerabilities are increasing due to pandemic, especially in the developing countries who are not digitally advanced. Every country who is struggling to achieve SDGs prior to COVID is known to be facing more problems after pandemic. In the first 3 months of 2020, investors moved around $90 billion out of emerging markets. In Pakistan, $2 billion was flowed out in March 2020 when pandemic hit the country. Pakistan's growth rate is projected to be minus 0.4% in 2019, and for next year it is expected to be about 2.3%. In Pakistan, there are almost 250,000 invested cases with 5,197 deaths. Fatality rate is 2.1%, which is lower than the global rate. I think it is time to rethink strategies to achieve SDGs. Especially, we have got to keep into mind that we must develop a strategy articulating targets to combat COVID-19. Strategy must be based on 4 principles: monitoring and oversight, coordination efforts at constitutional level by the parliamentarians, advocacy and awareness, and inclusivity of all. It is essential to realize that we as parliamentarians must catalyze our efforts to combat pandemic through effective utilization of existing resources and strengthening partnerships in the world. Once again, I thanks for giving me the floor. Goodbye and stay safe.
Thank you very much. We now have a colleague Duta from Bangladesh. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening. Greetings from Bangladesh. I am congratulating IPU for initiating this very strategic dialogue at this very difficult time. And I also like to congratulate the presenters. On behalf of Government of Bangladesh, under the leadership of our Prime Minister, she has developed a COVID-19 centric national annual budget and has provided already an immediate support for the 9 stimulus packages. But as COVID-19 has adversely affected economics at all levels, which has severely hampered SDG implementation and threatened to reverse achievements towards gaining SDG, pushing many of the most vulnerable back below the poverty lines. For mitigation, particularly for those people who have been left behind, what could be the revised strategies which we have to work together? And what could be the action plans and policies of United Nations and other international agencies by following the Paris Agreement? I would like to emphasize at this moment as member of the parliament that to follow 3 C's. The 3 C's are cooperation, collaboration, and coordination for responding to the inequalities and for the mind change of the overall people of the state, because it's not only the government who can manage this massive impact of pandemic impact. So I would like to echo with United Arab Emirates to develop task force on different SDG goals by the parliamentarians, and also to ensure that we have to manage not only by state, we have to manage globally, because this is something which will have a post impact which needs to be accomplished. Thank you again for giving me the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Gunga Prasad of Mauritius, you have the floor.
I want to thank all the panelists for their precious input. I think COVID-19 has highly highlighted how fragile humanity at large can be. We need to a new global solidarity contract and review the way we deal with a pandemic or any ecological, financial, health problems with renewed faith that to fight local and national problems, we will need to redesign global SDGs. Many nations may not have realized the urgency to meet the targets of the SDGs. The wide divide and gap between the rich and the poor has shown that sustainability should reach a new level, or else we will not meet the SDGs in the next 10 years. Parliamentarians who are policymakers can help immensely in achieving the goals of sustainability. The World Health Organization should invest more on medical research, ensure that there is proper capacity building, human resource readiness to face the challenges of meeting the challenges of SDGs. Perhaps reviewing our approach to environment and the natural resource available will be the first step in attaining the SDGs. Unequal distribution of financial resources, access to basic human needs, treatment of human beings on the basis of race, gender, religion, or nationality have further exacerbated the problems related to SDGs. Perhaps the new normal should be a greater solidarity among parliamentarians of the world, but also we have to think how we can be more charitable, how we need to think locally, but act. We need to think globally, but act locally. And I think such exercises in the future will help us, policymakers, to review how to reach SDGs. I thank all panelists.
Is the representative of Kenya present?
Okay, so I am a member of the National Assembly from Kenya. I want to thank the presenters very much and to emphasize the need that as members of parliament, we are the link between the communities and the people at the local context and the government, and particularly the international partners. In this regard, I want to appreciate that while there is political commitment evident through contextual models to incorporate SDGs in the agenda, such as I've seen in Kenya, it is extremely important to be more deliberate in building the capacities of local communities, particularly through cultural indigenous institutions, so that the connection between SDG 5, the connection with SDG 4 education, and in particular that of climate can be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just two brief remarks. The first one, I think it is important that we join a global ambitious call for developing countries without the ability for sufficient domestic resourcing of recovery. We have led a campaign which has gained gravitas from the support of the government of Jamaica, Nigeria, and Canada for 3 components. One, a $1 trillion enhancement of special drawing rights at the IMF, mostly through new resourcing, but also reallocation of existing rights to countries that are most in need. Secondly, we support a freeze on a moratorium on debt service, both the public and commercial, both the multilateral and commercial debt. And 3, there is absolute need for an ambitious global Marshall Plan for health mitigation and recovery, a COVID Marshall Plan for health. And I think it's important that as political leaders, you see the collective challenge that goes beyond national agenda, that unless we can confront the pandemic, both itself as a health challenge and as an economic challenge globally, no country will come out of the woods alone. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Dr. Roll.
Thank you so much. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I'm heartened by the calls for coordination, solidarity, thinking more broadly and in systems. It's wonderful to be part of this. I'm also really glad to see in the chat and in some of the comments questions about taxation and resource mobilization. And I think these are incredibly important. They're sort of the less sexy side of thinking about the SDGs. So I encourage people to continue to work on that area. I've put a few links into the chat where there's more direct case studies and resources, just to reiterate what I said in my comments, that there are lots of different steps that can be taken in this greener direction and in reforming finance. And so I'd encourage everyone to look to those, ranging from South Korea to Brazil, China, Bangladesh, India. There's all really interesting cases there. So we can take these practical steps in this common direction. So thank you very much. And also, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn or via the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was quite interesting. We are thankful to the comments of our colleague Fiora Monte of Italy on the importance of, at this stage of the pandemic, to bolster public health and improve the healthcare systems, not only for individuals, but also at a global level to be able to live on a healthier planet. Dr. Roll was very clear and was focused on the individual and the public. Take into account the important technological changes and to avoid risks at work, both due to the pandemic as well as elsewhere. Ms. Wafa Ali Mustafa. Focused on the role of MPs, we are sometimes working remotely, sometimes we're limited in what we can do, but we need to have a vision based on protection of human beings faced with the emergency, redesign the national budgets to take into account these needs and these requirements, and to redefine the priorities, because without a doubt, after the pandemic, there will be greater needs than the possibilities allowed by our respective budgets. The lack of resources becomes clearer and clearer faced with the requirements of societies writ large. Ms. Nyarasai Gulvasvarma reminded us very well that we need to base ourselves on the Paris Agreement, and generally speaking, among among the speakers, there was an agreement that the environment was a common denominator. And indeed, the countries that are not part of the Paris Agreement need to join, and the others need to fulfill the Paris Agreement. She was also proposing initiatives for the future, citizen-based initiatives on environmental issues as well. Dr. Kitui speaks about a Marshall Plan for the pandemic, a global plan to recuperate after COVID-19. Europe is doing quite a lot to help countries to overcome the pandemic, but we need to recognize that it is very difficult for the rest of the world to mobilize the required resources. We need to rethink sustainable development and the economy that this development is based on, and as members of parliament we have to be leaders in these changes. New rules, new financial rules, support through public action, and investment in local communities and the individuals who are suffering the greater need. So I believe that these are the conclusions, but through IPU, through ITU, we will receive a new approach on the world. So I want to thank all the members of the panel for their participation. We are grateful to all our speakers for their clearly expressed ideas, and to all the participants who have expressed their opinion, spoken through chat and through their interventions. And also we thank all of those who were present, even if they could not speak, in great numbers today. So thank you very much, Madam Chair and of IPU, and I thank the IPU Secretariat for working towards the success of this event. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.